and I'm tempted to start by using a word that used to be famous in India once upon a time, but that has not been used for many months. Mitron. I was absolutely delighted with this book, particularly Shiv Vishwanathan's introduction. They're very provocative, characteristically brilliant, and uncharacteristically brief. Where he talks about future as the domain of dissent and the possibility of eccentricity. This book has a surplus of dissent and eccentricity. But I think it's absolutely essential that this book come out at a time when the ruling establishment is shackled with alternative pasts. And I think it's very important to bring to society alternative futures. And I think you've done a great job encompassing economics, politics, society. Of course, there are many gaps which I'm sure you will fill, and I do want to congratulate you on this effort. A couple of comments I want to make on what's here. I think it's absolutely important what Paranjoy and what you have said, that any discussion of alternative futures. By the way, I was struck by the phrase alternative futures. We always talk of future alternatives. And this is one of those rare occasions when you're looking at alternative futures. I think any discussion of alternative futures must be anchored and grounded in demographic realities. And this is something that unfortunately in the last couple of years we have tended to take for granted because of this ugly phrase, demographic dividend. And we've all been mesmerized into thinking that demographics don't matter anymore, it's actually an advantage. But the fact is that whatever we do, whether it's alternative transportation, alternative energy, alternative housing, whatever future that we envision, whatever alternative future we envision, has to reckon with the fact that we are going to be 1.7 billion, whether we like it or not, by the year 2045. We're going to overtake China in 7 years' time, and we are going to be, that's our demographic karma, so to speak, 1.7 billion by 2045 to 2050. And there are characteristics of the demographic expansion which is going to add further to what we are going to envision for the future. You mentioned aging, absolutely true. I mean, Kerala and Tamil Nadu, 1 out of every 4 is going to be over the age of 65 by the year 2040. It's already here. And more states, not just Kerala and Tamil Nadu, more and more states are entering the demographic transition phase. And I think the nature, both the quantitative aspect of the demographics and the qualitative aspect of demographics, is very, very significant. I'm giving a talk day after tomorrow in Trivandrum on demographic futures, and I'll send you my lecture. And one of the things that I point out in that lecture is that you're going to see an expansion, phenomenal expansion in the population of single widowed women. This is because of the difference in life expectancy. This is not because of anything else. There are other factors, but the sheer pressure of life expectancy and the differentials in life expectancy are such that you're going to see a unusual increase in the population of single women. Of course, single could be separated, could be widowed, it could be divorced. But I'm focusing particularly on the widowed component of it. And what got me thinking was my own family. I have a 94-year-old aunt who's living with an 89-year-old mother of mine, and they are next to a 96-year-old cousin of theirs. And in my own family I'm seeing this. And this is, I think, becoming more and more common. So I think the point that has been made on demographics and the fact that our median age today is 28, and that even by the year 2050, our median age is going to be 38. So we are going to be a young population for the next 3.5 to 4 decades. I think the point that Paranjoy and you have made is absolutely essential. Whatever we do, we must keep the demographics in mind. I think it's very important. The second point I'd make is that somebody talked about our freedom movement being the, you talked about the freedom movement being the arena in which alternative futures were envisioned and discussed. Because the freedom movement had a broad church, and that church was the Congress Party. And the Congress Party had Nehru, Bose, Namboodiripad, who was the General Secretary of the Congress Party, people forget. Namboodiripad was the General Secretary of the Congress Party. It had even Hegdewar, and it had N.B. Khare, who became the president of the Hindu Mahasabha. So it was the umbrella, and the disappearance of that umbrella, in a way, constricted the debate on alternative futures. So you have to recreate that broad forum where, without getting into the abusive words like secular, communal, all these things, these are designed to stop any discussion and conversation. I think you need to create this large forum where people with alternative ideas come. And the freedom movement was unique in that respect, because if you look back at the debates that took place between 1920 and 1947, whether it was on economics for a free India or society for a free India, most of these debates took place within that broad movement, broad platform, and different points of view were expressed. We had different versions of the Constitution. We had 3-4 different versions of the Constitution before the final Constitution got adopted in 1950. So I think if this were to trigger a process of conversation across the political spectrum, you would be creating a mechanism for actually having a conversation. Now, I don't think you're going to get this in conventional political parties, I think you need to bring, what you need is a forum where you bring all political parties together. You can have a discussion on this with the Congress Party, you can have a discussion on this with the left, you can have a discussion with this even with the current ruling establishment, the perfectly sensible people, but they don't want to be seen. But nevertheless, you can always identify sensible people and have a discussion with them. But I think the important thing is to create a dialogue, create a process of discussion.
Only Man Ki Baat takes place at the moment. Only Man Ki Baat takes place. There is no dialogue.
Yeah, Man Ki Baat is one way. No, Man Ki Baat is a one-way Man Ki Baat. And as they say in Kerala, it's not Man Ki Baat, it's Monkey Baat. It's one way, No, but I'm very serious. I think you need to get the political class, you need to get the political establishment thinking about these issues. Otherwise, this will remain something in which the activists and the intellectuals and the academics, take part and feel happy that they have taken part. But it's how you translate that into the world of action, the world of ideas into the world of action. I saw my good friend Aruna's chapter with great interest. I'm amazed that Aruna writes in her chapter, and she doesn't even mention the one forum in which Aruna and her colleagues were able to bring the RTI the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the Forest Rights Act, and make it a reality. The National Advisory Council, I mean, she doesn't even mention the NAC in her chapter.
She's there. Yeah.
There's a past. Yeah. Although she gives credit. She says Congress, but she's very particular to say Congress with the left parties. And she does mention the
You should
fact.
grant that, Jairam.
No, that is the truth.
I mean, she's accurate in that, and she also.
She always speaks truth.
She bemoans the fact that in UPA 2 the left had abandoned the Congress, and therefore the National Food Security Act and the Land Acquisition Act were not anywhere. But I think you need a NAC type of forum where you have, the point I'm making is a serious point, which is to get the activists and the intellectuals and the academics with people who have the ability to convert those ideas and the opportunity, not just the ability, the opportunity to convert those ideas into actual. Because many of the decisions required to realize alternative futures have to be taken now. It's not as if that alternative futures, we will worry about it 40 years later. To realize an alternative future for transportation requires decisions to be taken now. To realize alternative futures for a low carbon economy, which Namrose has been writing and talking about, requires decisions to be taken now. Decisions are now. The realization of the decisions would be in the future. But those decisions have to be taken now, and for that you need this cross-fertilization between a political class, the political establishment, and the world of activists, academics, intellectuals, and so on. So how do we do this? That's the real issue. I think we need to, the next step, as has been suggested by Gunu, is certainly a production in regional languages. But I would say parallel step would be, should be, some form of engagement with political parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, how we do this. How do you get engagement with the political parties? I think, I would suggest a two-step process. What I would suggest is that the first step should be individual engagement with political parties, and a second step should be a collective engagement. If you start with a collective engagement, you're not going to get, far. I think you should start with an individual engagement with political parties, all political parties, national parties, regional parties. By the way, regional parties will play a very important role in the realization of many of these futures. So when we're talking of alternative futures, we're talking of alternative futures of individual states as well, right? So I think you need to get the regional parties on board and then have a collective mass in which the activists and the intellectuals and the academics look at a cross-section. Now, what's the forum which does this? How this gets done is something that we can discuss. I'm willing, we can, as far as the Congress Party is concerned, there's not a problem. I don't think you're going to have a problem with the left. I don't think you're going to have a problem with some of the regional parties. The main problem will really be with the party which is in power. And how do you create those windows of engagement with that party in power when all of us don't want that party in power in 2019. So, I mean, this is the dilemma that you're going to have. You don't want them to be in power, but at the same time, they are part of the political firmament. You can't wish them away. You have to deal with it. So that's, maybe Mark Tully can help,
You will have to look for
the third comment I'll just make on the book, and I'll stop here, is, there have been, in this book, I find, I'm struck with what Shiv talks in his introduction. It's really a brilliant introduction. I recommend those of you who have yet to read the book, I recommend that you read Shiv's forward. One point he makes, which struck me, was that when we write alternative futures, we're always very optimistic. We will always talk about what things should be. But he also talks about the fact that we should think of alternative nightmares. I think the word he uses is alternative nightmares. Because that often will correspond more to reality than what we are envisioning. I think the phrase that he uses at the end, and he says that this is one of the weaknesses or one of the shortcomings of this book. If you remember,
The first.
Ashish, what he at the end he says that. Secondly, I wish there was more on war and violence. Yes. Is the point he makes, and he goes on genocide, because many of the alternative realities that we are dreaming of need to go beyond the logic of genocide, apocalypse, and extinction. So, thirdly, one wishes that there was a sense of evil.
Yeah.
The point that Shiv is making in his usual colorful way is that this entire book gives you a sense of optimism, that what can happen, what should happen. But there are things that are happening, and if they continue to happen, what is the future? Because that is also an alternative future, by the way. The alternative future is, one of the alternative futures is, what happens if the current trends in the economy, what happens in current trends in the political economy in society continue? What will happen if social inequalities continue to increase? What will happen if ecological sustainability is not integrated into this economic expansion? What will happen if majoritarian sentiment continues unchecked? I mean, this is what Shiv is trying to highlight in the book. I think that's a very important point, and that will give this entire exercise a certain sense of reality. Otherwise, there is a danger of dismissing this as utopian. Final point, many of you mentioned South Asia. Actually, the reason why I'm leaving early is because there's a book on alternative South Asian futures that is being released at 6:30 at the India International Center, bought out by the South Asian University. Very interesting. It's how to look at South Asia in future. Alternative ways of looking at South Asian economics, South Asian politics, South Asian culture, South Asian civil society, and so on. So I think there are people who are beginning to think in this way. So all in all, wonderfully produced, very well written, and I hope that this would trigger a process of debate, and I entirely agree with Dr. Nigam that we need to use this as a manifesto for transformation in 2019.